If he dies on schedule, the insurance pays out. If not, everything falls apart. That sentence rang in my ears as I stood frozen in the marble kitchen of the very house I had sold my remaining years to buy for my son. I didn't scream or slam the table. I just stood there, looking at the woman I once called my daughter-in-law, and realized something horrifying. My son wasn't just being poisoned. His time of death was being calculated. I turned away, pretending to be weak, but in my head, I had already started setting a trap. Before the story continues, if you're listening from somewhere, leave a comment below. And if you ever believed family was always the safest place, hit like, because this story may make you think again. My name is Jerome, 71 years old, a widower. My back aches every morning. My knees crack whenever I stand up. I should have retired by now, fishing by a lake, drinking weak coffee, reading the local paper like other old men. But I still do manual labor every day for my son, Matthew. I do it because I promised my wife before she passed that I would keep our boy safe, even though he's already in his 40s. 6 months ago, I sold the only house I had ever owned. The house my wife and I painted wall by wall, built shelf by shelf, planted every maple tree in the front yard. I sold it to gather the down payment for Matthew to buy a proper house in the suburbs. The same house where I was now standing in the kitchen, where the marble floor was so cold it numbed the soles of my feet. I moved into a small rental apartment with low ceilings and pipes that rattled all night. I went back to the construction site. I told myself it was only temporary. Elizabeth, my daughter-in-law, seemed grateful back then. She called me Dad in a voice as soft as cotton. Every morning, right at 6:30 a.m., she handed me a lunchbox and a hot cup of coffee, telling me to eat well and keep my strength up. I thought I had done the right thing. I thought family was still family. Until that noon. I sat down on a stack of lumber at the job site and opened the blue lunchbox. It wasn't mine. Inside, next to a cold sandwich, was Matthew's heart medication organizer. My chest tightened. Matthew had to take his medication on time. Miss it, and his heart could fail at any moment. I jumped to my feet, about to rush it to him. Miguel, the electrician on my crew, sat down beside me. He used to be a military medic, 10 years in places where you learn to look death straight in the eye. Miguel glanced at the pillbox, then went completely still. He picked up a pill, held it to the sunlight, and said nothing. I still remember his hand trembling slightly. "Jerome," he said quietly, "don't give this to your son." I forced a laugh, said it was probably just a mix-up. Miguel didn't smile. He pulled out a small knife from his pocket and gently scraped the edge of the pill. It didn't behave like real medicine. It crumbled into fine white powder. He rubbed a tiny bit between his fingers, studying the texture and the way it broke apart. "This doesn't look right," he said, his voice dropping. "It's compressed powder, not the medication your son needs." My ears rang. I told him Elizabeth picked up the meds herself at the pharmacy. Miguel shook his head. "If Matthew takes this," he said, "his heart isn't being supported. With his condition, he's got days at most." I looked down at the organizer. The compartments for the previous 2 days were empty. I stood there in the dust and noise of the construction site, yet felt colder than in that marble kitchen. Everything I thought I knew about my family began to crack, but I didn't shout. I didn't run to the police. Part of me understood that if this was intentional, whoever was behind it was waiting for me to react, and the wrong reaction could get Matthew killed faster. That evening I brought the pillbox home, set it on the table, and stared at it for a long time. Elizabeth called, apologizing over and over, saying she had rushed taking their daughter to school and mixed things up. Her voice was so perfect it made you want to believe her. She talked about a new detox treatment, said the doctor recommended switching meds temporarily so Matthew's body could adjust. I let her talk. I said I understood. I said I was old and probably worrying too much. I hung up and sat alone in my rented apartment, listening to fire engines wail down the street. I started paying attention. The way Elizabeth chose her words, the way she didn't panic at all when I mentioned fake pills, the way she was too quick to reassure me. I realized small details only show themselves when someone believes you've swallowed the lie whole. The next morning, I went to the job site earlier than usual. I worked like nothing had happened. I let Elizabeth keep bringing lunch every day. I nodded, thanked her, played the role of the harmless old man easy to control. Inside, I turned every piece over and over. I told myself silence right now wasn't cowardice. Silence was survival. On the third day, I opened the pill organizer Miguel had examined. That's when I saw what made my spine go cold. At the bottom of one compartment, there was a tiny scratch, like it had been opened and closed many times. Not an accident, a habit. Proof this wasn't the first time Matthew had taken fake pills. I set the pill box down, my hands shaking but my mind clearer than ever. If this wasn't the first time, then someone had planned it. And if it was planned, I didn't have much time. I slipped the pill box into my jacket pocket and zipped it up like I was hiding a shard of glass that could cut anyone who touched it. All afternoon at the site, I worked like a machine. Nails into wood, hammer strikes, saws screaming, cement dust burning my throat. But in my head, there was only one question. When did this start? That night, I drove my old car back to my apartment complex, the parking lot stained with oil patches. I sat for a few minutes before getting out, looking through the windshield at flickering hallway lights and hearing a neighbor's TV through thin walls. I used to have a house with a wooden porch and a wind chime my wife hung, tinkling softly whenever the breeze blew, like a reminder that life could still be gentle. Now I lived in a cheap apartment with a window facing a brick wall, hearing people argue at night. I chose that life for Matthew. I remember clearly the day I signed the papers to sell the house. The closing agent at the title office walked me through the paperwork, the dates, the fees, and the deadlines. I heard the words but didn't really absorb them. I just looked at the signature line, my hand trembling, and told myself one simple thing. My son needs this. I gathered all my savings, added the house sale, and transferred it straight into Matthew's account so he could make the down payment. He told me, tired and stressed, that without a stable home his marriage would collapse. I believed him. I thought I was buying peace for my son. When my wife was alive, she used to say some men spend their whole lives building a home. I built one, then tore it down with my own hands and gave it to my son, trusting he would know how to keep it. That night I called Matthew. He answered after a few rings, his voice hoarse like he'd just woken up. I asked how he was eating, how his heart was doing. He answered vaguely, like he was checking to see who might be listening. I mentioned the new doctor Elizabeth had talked about. There was a brief silence on the line, so short most people wouldn't notice. But I did. "What new doctor?" Matthew asked quietly. My throat went dry. I laughed lightly, said I must be mistaken, that Elizabeth mentioned changing meds, some treatment. Matthew stayed silent another beat, then said, "No one changed anything, Dad. I'm still seeing the same doctor. I'm fine." He said, "fine," the way people repeat a line they've practiced. I heard footsteps behind him, then a cabinet closing. Matthew lowered his voice even more. "Elizabeth's busy. I'll call you later." The call ended before I could say anything else. I set the phone down and looked at my hands, the calluses standing out. Once, these hands held Matthew when he had a fever, built him a wooden sled for winter, fixed the roof whenever it leaked. Now, these hands couldn't reach my son without permission. The next morning, I stopped by Matthew's house with the excuse of bringing food. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to see their real reaction. The suburb was quiet, lawns trimmed, white fences, the smell of baked bread drifting from somewhere. The kind of peace that makes you assume every house holds a happy family. Elizabeth opened the door. She wore a light sweater, hair neatly tied back, her smile gentle and practiced, like something meant to calm questions before they formed. "Dad, you're early," she said, glancing at the bag in my hand. "You brought food again. You work too hard." I stepped inside. Matthew sat on the sofa. He looked thinner than last month. Hollow cheeks, dark circles, his t-shirt hanging loose at the shoulders. He looked at me, a flicker of warmth passing through his eyes, then disappearing as if someone had pulled a curtain. I asked Matthew about his medication. He started to answer, but Elizabeth cut in gently. "Matthew has been sensitive lately, so I help manage his meds on schedule. You know how forgetful he can be." I looked at Matthew. He nodded slightly, not meeting my eyes. I sat down and unpacked the food like an old father who only knows how to care by cooking. As my hands moved, my eyes drifted to the corner of the kitchen where the pill organizer sat next to a bottle of vitamins. I remembered the scratch underneath. I wanted to grab it, ask directly, pull Matthew out of this house. But I didn't. I heard Miguel in my head. Don't stir things up without proof. And I understood something else, more painful. If Matthew was being controlled, he might already be afraid of me, afraid of the truth, afraid even of being saved. Elizabeth brought me tea, set it in front of me, then sat opposite like a hostess. She asked about my work, my back, whether I'd seen a doctor. Every question felt rehearsed. I answered briefly, watching Matthew. I saw him rub his chest out of habit, then stop when Elizabeth glanced his way. When I stood to leave, Elizabeth walked me to the door. She spoke quietly, just low enough that Matthew in the living room couldn't hear, but sharp enough to cut. "Don't make things complicated," she said, her smile unchanged. "Do you think everything has to revolve around you?" I froze. She tilted her head slightly, her voice no longer sweet, but cold and direct. "If you didn't help, this family would have fallen apart a long time ago." It wasn't thanks. It was a verdict. As if all those years I worked, sold my house, scraped together money, went back to construction, were just an old man's obligation. As if I had no right to question, no right to doubt, no right to demand the truth. I swallowed my anger. I nodded like a reasonable old father. I said, "I understand." My mouth tasted like ash. Elizabeth smiled and opened the door for me, as if she'd just taught me a lesson. On the drive home, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. I didn't let myself shake. I didn't let myself get angry. Anger was what they were waiting for. I got back to my apartment, pulled out a small notebook, and started writing down every detail I remembered. When Matthew took his meds, what Elizabeth said, how Matthew reacted. I even wrote down how Elizabeth stood between me and my son, like a locked door. I checked the medication schedule Matthew once taped to the fridge. I scrolled through old photos on my phone, zoomed in on that paper. I compared it to the pill organizer I'd seen. There were days inexplicably empty, like the meds had disappeared, without reason. Not forgotten, not mistaken. Someone had made them disappear. I sat still for a long time, then stood and put on my jacket. I decided I couldn't just rely on stories anymore. I had to see Matthew with my own eyes, in a moment Elizabeth couldn't arrange, couldn't signal, couldn't perform. As I held my car keys, a thought slammed into my chest, stopping me in the middle of the room. If Matthew couldn't control his own medication, couldn't control his calls, couldn't even control how he answered his own father, then who was really holding the strings of my son's life? I drove around 2 blocks before turning into Matthew's street, as if going straight there would expose my intentions. The house stood bright and wide, cream-colored stone front, polished garage door, lawn trimmed like a carpet. I once stood there with purchase papers in my hand, lighter because I thought I'd done the right thing. Now it looked like an expensive gift box hiding something no one wanted to open. I parked and walked up to the porch. The doorbell rang, and Elizabeth appeared so quickly I knew she was always on alert. She wore neat home clothes, hair carefully styled, fabric softener scent lingering. A woman like that makes people believe instantly that she takes care of her family with all her heart. "Dad," Elizabeth said, her smile soft as cotton, "you came without warning." "I miss Matthew," I said, keeping my voice normal. "I want to see him for a minute." Her smile stayed, but her eyes changed. She shifted, blocking half the doorway. "Matthew is resting," she said. "He's detoxing." The doctor said, "Absolute quiet. You understand." The word detox hit my ears like a hastily pulled curtain. I stepped inside anyway, just far enough not to be pushed out like a stranger. In the living room, the curtains were half drawn, light filtered through fabric, making everything look pale. On the table sat vitamin bottles, blister packs, used tissues, and a thermometer lying there like someone had just checked quickly and forgotten. "I'll just stand at the bottom of the stairs," I said softly. "I won't make noise." Elizabeth placed her hand on the railing, small but firm. "No," she replied too quickly. "If you go up, he'll get agitated. His heart is weak." His heart is weak. Those words used to terrify me into obedience. Now they sharpened my focus. I nodded as if agreeing, then looked toward the stairs. From upstairs came a short, dry cough, like someone trying not to be heard. "Matthew," I called, just loud enough to reach. "It's Dad." Elizabeth cut in immediately. "He's sleeping, Dad." But right after, I heard faint footsteps dragging on wood. I heard them because a lifetime on construction teaches you to hear small sounds inside noise. I took one more step, keeping my eyes gentle. "I just want to ask one thing. If you hear me, answer me, okay?" Elizabeth looked at me, her eyes ordering me to stop. I ignored it. I called up the stairs. "Matthew, what's your new doctor's name? I want to write it down, just in case." Silence fell. Longer than a breath, longer than comfort. Then a weak, hoarse voice came down, uncertain, like someone lost. "What doctor, Dad?" That question wasn't forgetfulness. It was real confusion. It was a door opening at exactly the right moment, letting me see that behind the beautiful paint of this house was a dark room. Elizabeth blinked, then immediately laughed, a light laugh as if everything were somehow charming. "See?" she said, turning to me, her voice syrupy sweet. "Brain fog, Dad. The doctor said it's from the medication and the detox process. He mixes things up sometimes. Don't worry." Mixing things up, brain fog, detox, words that sound scientific enough to silence an old father. As she spoke, she quickly walked toward the bottom of the stairs, looking up as if talking to Matthew, her tone shifting into something coddling. "Honey, go back to sleep. Don't try to answer. You're exhausted." I watched her, and at that exact moment, through a gap in the railing, I saw Matthew. Just for a second. He stood on the landing, thin and swollen, his loose pajamas hanging off him, his face so gray he looked anemic. His eyes met mine. Not the eyes of a husband being cared for, the eyes of a son trying to signal that something was wrong. For an instant, I saw Matthew gripping the railing, his fingers white. His lips moved, like he wanted to say something, and then Elizabeth turned back at just the right moment, blocking him from view the way you cover a crack in a wall. I felt the anger rise, hot and fast, but I held it down. I had seen how weak Matthew was, how just standing there seemed to drain what little strength he had left. If I made a scene, if I called the police right in front of Elizabeth, if I grabbed the pillbox and demanded answers, Matthew would panic. Panic with a heart already being worn down is not a risk anyone should take. I exhaled, slowed my voice, softened my eyes as if I truly believed her. "I'm sorry," I said to Elizabeth, loud enough for Matthew to hear. "I'm old. I worry too much. I just want to be sure he's being taken care of properly." Elizabeth relaxed instantly, like she'd just won a small round. "You're so kind," she said. "Don't worry, I'm handling everything." I looked up the stairs one more time. Matthew was gone. The house was large, yet suddenly felt as tight as a cage. "I brought some soup," I said, setting the bag on the table. "Leave it there. He can eat when he wakes up." Elizabeth glanced at the bag, a flicker of control passing through her eyes, then smiled again. "Thank you, Dad. You always think of us." I nodded and headed for the door. As I stepped down from the porch, I didn't turn back right away. I wanted her to think I was just an old man easily led, easily soothed by a few sweet dads. I got into the car, started the engine, and drove off slowly as if nothing had happened. But once I left the neighborhood, I turned onto a small side road and stopped under the trees. My hands rested on the steering wheel, trembling slightly from holding everything in. Matthew's face filled my mind, those pleading eyes, and the innocent question, "What, doctor?" ringing like an alarm bell. I couldn't pull Matthew out with force. I had to pull him out with timing, with surprise, by catching Elizabeth before she could set the stage. I looked at the clock. I thought about Elizabeth's work schedule I'd overheard in passing. I thought about the hours when the house would be empty. I clenched the car keys, and a cold, clear decision formed in my mind. I would return to that house at a time no one expected, without warning, without asking permission, and without giving Elizabeth a chance to prepare anything. I sat in the car a few more minutes until my breathing steadied. My hands still felt cold against the steering wheel, like if I relaxed, everything would slip away. I no longer had the right to let emotion lead. I needed clarity, because inside that house was one person slowly fading and another controlling the story with a smile. I didn't go back to my apartment right away. I stopped at a small grocery store near the job site and bought a bag of soft bread and a jar of strawberry jam, something Matthew loved when he was a skinny little boy who always asked for an extra slice. I wanted a harmless excuse to return, a gift that wouldn't raise suspicion. It was late afternoon. I waited until the neighborhood lights came on, a time when people assume everything is settled and surprises are unlikely. I drove back but didn't park in front. I left the car 2 blocks away and walked around, my steps slow and casual, like an old man out for a stroll. No one noticed me. At 71, invisibility can be a weapon. The front porch light was still on. I had no intention of knocking. I walked around to the side where a secondary door led into the kitchen and out to the backyard. Earlier that day, while standing on the porch, I'd noticed something small but telling. The side door latch was usually just closed, not fully locked, because they were used to feeling safe in a wealthy neighborhood. I tried it gently. The door shifted. My heart pounded, but I didn't rush. I stood still for a beat, listening. No television, no footsteps, just the steady hum of the heating system and wind moving through the trees. I pushed the door a little more and stepped inside with a care that felt almost respectful toward a house I once took pride in. I walked through the kitchen, where the marble countertop reflected the soft yellow light. I didn't linger. I'd already heard that sentence here. I avoided the stairs, avoided the bedrooms, avoided anything that might wake Matthew. I went straight to his home office on the ground floor, the room Matthew once told me he wanted by the window so he could look out at the garden while working. The office door was slightly open. I pushed it. Not locked. The smell of paper and old wood mixed with cold coffee. On the desk sat a closed laptop, a few notebooks, a tilted family photo frame. In the photo, Matthew smiled, Elizabeth leaning into him, her hand on his chest like a loving wife. I wanted to smash it, but I didn't. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and began looking for what I'd come to find. I didn't rummage like a thief. I searched like a father used to setting rebar. methodical, purposeful, leaving no extra traces. The right drawer held tax papers, bills, a few bank envelopes. The left drawer held the house contract, repair documents, and a thick file clipped inside a gray plastic folder. I pulled it out. On the very first page, the bold printed words made my vision blur. Life insurance policy. I swallowed hard. My fingers turned the pages slowly, as if the paper might cut my skin. The numbers stared back at me, clear and cold, completely devoid of emotion. $3.8 million. I had to read it again to be sure I wasn't mistaken. Not 380,000. Not 800,000. 3.8 million. Enough to change a life. Enough to turn death into a goal. I checked the signing date, a few months earlier, exactly when Matthew's condition had supposedly worsened, according to Elizabeth. Exactly when she started talking more about a new doctor, detox, treatment plans. All the scattered pieces slid into place in a way that made my stomach drop. I turned to the beneficiary section. The first name was not Elizabeth. I frowned, my eyes tightening with anger and confusion. The original beneficiary was a family trust under Matthew's name, with clear terms stating the assets would be managed until certain conditions were met. I read the name of the trustee and had to stop. It wasn't Elizabeth. It was a name I didn't recognize, a man Matthew had never mentioned at dinner, never brought to any family event. Then came an attached amendment. Newer ink, a newer stamp. And in the updated beneficiary section, the name appeared like a hammer strike. Elizabeth. I sat frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. This was no longer just a suspicion that something was wrong. This was raw motive laid out on paper, legalized with signatures and seals. So that sentence in the kitchen hadn't been frustration. It was a schedule. It was a plan. If he dies on schedule... I gripped the file until my fingers went numb. Oh, a thought hit me hard enough to chill my spine. Did Matthew know? Did Matthew sign? Did Matthew agree? Or had he been led, lied to, pressured at his weakest point? I looked around the office. The desk was unnaturally tidy, not like the clutter Matthew used to have, always leaving keys and sticky notes everywhere. This room looked staged, as if someone had cleaned it to erase traces, as if order itself was being used to hide the truth. I forced myself to breathe. I couldn't run out screaming that my son was about to be killed by paperwork. The police would need proof of harm, fake medication, concrete actions. All I had was an insurance contract and a gut feeling already confirmed by a powdered pill. Enough to know danger. Not enough to end it. I put the file back exactly where it was, aligned just right, as if untouched. I took out my phone, stood in the shadow of the office, and called the only person I trusted now. The former military medic who'd looked at the pill and said it was fake. The phone rang a few times. He answered, his voice rough with early sleep. "Hello?" "It's me, Jerome," I said quietly. "I need you. Tonight." There was a pause, then his voice sharpened. "What did you find?" I didn't say everything over the phone, just enough for him to understand how serious it was. "Insurance," I whispered. 3.8 million, and the beneficiary was changed. He muttered a curse, not crude, just the kind that slips out from someone who's seen too much injustice. "So there's motive. But you're right. It's not enough yet for the police." "I have to find the real medication," I said. "I have to replace it before it's too late." "You can't do this alone," he said firmly. "Listen to me. Don't confront them. Don't let them know you suspect anything. You need two things, the real medication and proof of the fake one." "I understand," I said, glancing toward the hallway as if someone might hear. "And Jerome," he lowered his voice, "sometimes saving someone doesn't follow the law exactly." I closed my eyes, That sentence confirmed what had been building in me since I stood under the trees. I'd lived my whole life trying to do things right, pay taxes, work hard, stay out of trouble. But if the law moved slower than the timeline aimed at Matthew, then I had to choose my son. "I'll do what needs to be done," I said, "but I need your guidance. We have to find the real medication." "All right," he replied. "Meet me early tomorrow, and tonight, get out of there. Leave no trace." I ended the call, put the phone in my pocket, and headed back out the side door the way I came in. When my hand touched the handle, I paused for a beat and looked back at the silent house. It was no longer the gift I bought for my son. It was a trap wrapped in expensive carpeting. I stepped outside, pulled the door closed gently, quiet as a breath. Walking back toward where I'd parked, cold wind slapped my face, sharpening my thoughts. I knew exactly what I was about to do. If I wanted to save Matthew, I might have to cross a line I'd never touched in my entire life, and I had already begun preparing for it. The next morning, I woke before the sky was fully light. My cheap apartment rattled with pipes whenever a neighbor ran water, and the smell of instant coffee clung to the curtains. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing my lower back, pain running from my spine into my hips, like a reminder that I wasn't young enough for reckless choices. Then I remembered Matthew's gray face, and every hesitation hardened into resolve. I called Elizabeth around noon, choosing the time I knew she was usually free so she'd have no excuse to refuse. I let my voice tremble, deliberately dragging my breath. "Elizabeth, Dad thinks he threw his back out. I can't get up. Could you come help me for a bit?" She paused just long enough for me to hear her thinking. Then her voice turned sweet again. "Oh no, Dad. Why didn't you say so earlier? I'll come right away. Just lie still." That dad of hers was always placed just right, just loud enough, like a cloth draped over something rotten underneath. I set the phone down, looked around my cramped room, and slowly arranged the props for my little performance. I pulled a chair close to the bed and placed my cane beside it. I set a bottle of supplements on the table as if I'd just taken some. Then I sat down, slumped my shoulders, let the fatigue show. I didn't need to act much. Old age is a free roll. When the doorbell rang, I didn't get up right away. I waited a few beats, then shuffled over, groaning softly as if every step drove a nail into my back. Elizabeth came in with a beige leather handbag on her shoulder and a paper bag in her other hand, smelling of hot soup and bread. She wore a light sweater, hair neatly styled, makeup just enough to look natural. Anyone would think she was the perfect daughter-in-law. "Dad, look at you," she exclaimed, rushing over to support me like a seasoned nurse. "Sit down. I'll take care of everything." I let her help me, deliberately putting more weight on her arm than usual. I heard her inhale slightly, but she kept smiling. "I'm sorry," I said weakly. "I'm old. Sometimes I feel like a burden." "Don't say that," she rubbed my back, her movements practiced. "Family is family, Dad. You've sacrificed so much." It sounded comforting, but I noticed her eyes flick around the apartment, checking for anyone else, anything out of place. Then her gaze landed briefly on my phone on the table. Just a second, but enough to tell me she was always alert. I nodded, playing the trusting old man. While she went into the tiny kitchen to heat the soup, I watched her handbag. It rested on the sofa, the zipper slightly open, a metal keyring glinting inside. I couldn't see clearly, but my gut told me it wasn't just car keys. Elizabeth brought the soup out, set it down, and sat across from me like this was a routine care visit. She blew on a spoonful, then lifted it toward my mouth. "Eat a little. If you get sick, Matthew will worry." I swallowed hard at hearing my son's name used like a prop. I opened my mouth and let her feed me, spoon by spoon, like a helpless child. I felt humiliated, but I swallowed that too, like bitter medicine meant to keep me alive. Between spoonfuls of soup, I deliberately made small talk, drawing her out, hoping she'd talk more and slip up. "How's Matthew today?" I asked. "Much better," she replied instantly, smooth as if reciting a line. "The doctor says detox reactions are normal." I nodded, eyes lowered. "Which doctor was that again? I'm old, I forget things." She laughed, a smile that was both gentle and hollow. "Don't worry, Dad. I handle everything. You just rest." I let that sentence hang in the air. I handle everything. It sounded caring, but from another angle, it was a declaration of control. I pretended to cough hard, clutching my chest, gasping as if I were about to faint. Elizabeth jumped up immediately and rushed to get water. That was the moment I'd been waiting for. I leaned slightly as if reaching for a tissue, keeping my movements slow and unremarkable. For a brief moment, I saw what I needed in her bag, a key that looked like it belonged to Matthew's house. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't rush. I simply made sure I had it without drawing her attention, then returned to my helpless act until she left, still believing I was too weak to notice anything at all. Elizabeth came back, set the glass of water on the table, her eyes flicking briefly toward the sofa. She didn't notice. She lifted the glass to my lips, her voice sweet again. "Drink a little." I took a small sip and nodded in thanks, as if she'd just saved me from a stroke. Inside, what I'd just done didn't feel like stealing. It felt like taking one step closer to pulling my son out of the hands of someone holding the strings. Elizabeth sat back down and continued feeding me soup. I let her, partly so she'd believe I was truly helpless, partly so I'd have more time to observe. There was a faint indentation on her wrist, like she often wore a watch but hadn't today. Her nails had fresh, nude polish. Small details like that made me think of preparation, of how carefully she always wanted to appear perfect. After nearly half an hour, she stood up to clean, placing the bowl in the sink as if caring for her own father. "Dad, I have to go. This afternoon I'm taking Matthew in for a checkup." "Okay," I said weakly. "Thank you. I'm such a burden." She leaned down and hugged me, a light hug, just enough to look good on any camera if one existed. I caught the soft scent of her perfume, and a chill ran down my spine. When the door closed, I stood still for a few seconds, listening to her footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I locked my apartment door, drew the curtains, and took the key out from under the napkin. It lay in my palm like a small piece of metal that could decide life or death. I stared at it for a long moment, then picked up my phone and called my old colleague immediately. "I've got it," I said, barely breathing. "The key." He paused, then asked quickly, "You're sure it's the house key?" "I'm sure," I replied. "I saw the tag and the style matches Matthew's place." "Good," he said. "Then tonight or tomorrow night. But we need a clear plan. You're going in for the real medication and evidence, not to satisfy your anger." "I understand," I said. "I just want Matthew to live." "And Jerome," he emphasized. "If you fail, they won't just take your son's life. They'll bury you in trouble too." I hung up and sat down, my hands clasped together like I was praying. I wasn't a reckless man. I was just an old man who'd sold nearly his entire life to buy peace for his son, only to discover that peace was fake. I clenched the key until my knuckles turned white. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but because I knew this time I was stepping into the dark. And if I stepped wrong, I would lose both Matthew and my freedom. That evening I could barely eat. I kept staring at the clock like a man waiting for his own trial. Every car passing outside made me flinch, as if someone already knew I was holding a key that didn't belong to me. My old teammate arrived after 9 p.m., parked a short distance from the building, then walked around to the back entrance. He was a few years older than me, broad-shouldered, his steps still steady from his days as a military medic. He didn't say much, just looked me straight in the eye as if asking one question. "Are you ready?" I nodded. My readiness wasn't loud or brave. It was the kind that comes from an old man who's reached the edge and has nowhere left to retreat. We waited until I was certain Elizabeth was far from the house. Earlier that day, she had mentioned a clinic appointment that would keep her away for a while, and I had learned her routine well enough to know when the home usually went quiet. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I had no room left for hesitation. "Now," my friend whispered. We drove to Matthew's neighborhood. The multi-million-dollar houses sat silent under pale yellow streetlights, lawns trimmed like they'd been measured with a ruler, bare trees swaying lightly in the cold wind. I had once stood here with pride lodged in my throat, handing over the symbolic key to my son and thinking I'd fulfilled my duty as a father. Now I was returning like a stranger, holding a stolen key taken from my own daughter-in-law. We approached the house as quietly as we could, hearts pounding, trying not to draw attention. I used the key I had taken earlier, and the door gave way without a sound that felt louder than it should have. I held my breath, listening for anything that would give us away. Nothing happened, no alarm, no sudden lights. We stepped inside with one goal and one goal only: find the real medication and secure proof that the pills being given to Matthew were not what they claimed to be. This house once held my wife's laughter when she was alive, once echoed with Matthew's footsteps running up the stairs when he was young. Now it was so clean it felt cold, like a luxury hotel without a soul. My friend signaled. We moved quickly but quietly, like shadows. Our goal was clear: the real medication, evidence. Touch nothing unnecessary, leave no trace. I went into Matthew's office first, the place where I'd found the insurance policy. Everything was exactly the same, suspiciously neat. I opened the bottom drawer where I'd seen some medical paperwork before. No medication. We went upstairs. The master bedroom door was closed. I placed my hand on the knob, feeling my palm damp with sweat. I opened it very slowly, careful not to let the hinges creak. Inside was dark, only a faint strip of hallway light cutting across the floor. The bed was perfectly made, sheets smooth, pillows untouched. I remembered Matthew's swollen face on that bed, and a surge of rage rose in me. I forced it down. Not now. My friend went straight to the nightstand, checked quickly. Empty. He shook his head. I looked around, my eyes landing on the large built-in closet shared by Elizabeth and Matthew, sliding doors. I pulled gently. The smell of perfume and fabric softener hit me. Elizabeth's clothes hung arranged by color, like a magazine spread. Her carefulness was unsettling. "Medication isn't kept like this," my friend whispered. "It has to be somewhere people assume no one would dare touch." I swallowed. "You mean?" He pointed to the low cabinet beside the closet, the one with drawers. "There." I knelt down. My back flared with pain, but I clenched my teeth. I pulled open the top drawer. Silk scarves, socks, small items. Nothing. The second drawer held Elizabeth's underwear. I froze for a second, embarrassed and furious. Not because of the underwear, because of the calculation. She knew no one would want to touch that drawer, especially an elderly father-in-law. And she'd used that fact to hide the most important thing. I pulled the drawer out a little farther. Between neatly folded fabric, there was a clear plastic zip bag taped to the bottom of the drawer. I reached in and touched the cool plastic. My friend looked at me, his eyes sharp. "That's it." I carefully peeled back the tape. Inside the bag were 2 pill bottles identical to the ones Matthew was supposed to be taking. Same color, same labels, but the pills inside were different. The real pills had texture, a slightly dull finish, not chalk white like pressed powder. My chest tightened as if someone had grabbed it. The shock wasn't just where the pills were hidden. It was the sick realization that Elizabeth had stored Matthew's life among her most private belongings, like a power play. She wanted it in a place that felt untouchable. as if her husband's life were just another personal possession tucked away where she pleased. I gripped the bag, my hands shaking. My breathing went shallow and I had to stop, count my breaths, the way people do to avoid collapsing. "Stay calm," my friend said. "We stick to the plan." We took out the real medication, then searched for the fake pills to keep as evidence. They weren't here. That made it even clearer. The fake pills were brought downstairs daily as part of the treatment, while the real ones were hidden like treasure. My friend opened the lower drawer of the cabinet. Inside was a shoebox. In it were several empty blister packs, a few half-used bottles, and a small bag filled with white, lightweight pills that looked fake at a glance. My throat burned. There were more than I'd expected. Not just a few days' worth. This had been going on for a long time. "Take everything," I whispered. "All the fake ones." He nodded and, wearing gloves, placed them into the evidence bag he'd prepared. I watched his movements, professional and careful, leaving no fingerprints, not a stray hair. Then came the most important part. Replacing the medication. We carried the real pills downstairs, found where Elizabeth usually kept Matthew's medicine. A small tray inside a kitchen cabinet held a day-by-day pill organizer divided into morning, noon, and night. I opened it. The chalk-white pills lay neatly arranged, like a death schedule already written. I took the organizer into the bathroom under the bright light and replaced each pill one by one. My hands trembled, but I couldn't afford a mistake. I placed the real pills into the correct slots, the right days, the same quantities, the same way Elizabeth always did, so Matthew wouldn't suspect anything and Elizabeth wouldn't notice at a glance. The fake pills went into the evidence bag. I didn't throw them away. I wanted them to exist, solid and undeniable, so no one could later say I imagined things. When we were done, we wiped down the surfaces we'd touched with a soft cloth. I put the underwear drawer back exactly as it was, each piece folded in the same way, then slid it closed. I hated myself for having to do that, but I understood. One misplaced detail, and Elizabeth would know someone had been inside. And then Matthew would lose whatever time we'd gained. We left through the same side door, locking it as if it had never been opened. I stood outside in the cold, wind slapping my face, my heart pounding like a drum. I looked up at the second-floor window where Matthew had been lying. I saw nothing, just thick curtains. On the drive back, we didn't speak. Words felt unnecessary and dangerous. I got home, hid the evidence bag at the bottom of my closet under old coats, then set my phone on the table and stared at it like it was a bomb. Then came the waiting. The next 24 hours stretched like a lifetime. I didn't dare call Matthew too often. I sent one short message. "Are you eating okay? Dad misses you." No mention of pills, no mention of doctors. I had to let Elizabeth believe I was just a weak, worried old man. The next morning, I went to the job site for a few hours as usual, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time machinery roared, I jumped, thinking my phone was vibrating. I came home early, sat still in my chair, eyes fixed on the screen. If Matthew took the real medication, his body would respond. His breathing would ease. His color would improve. Maybe he'd be clear-headed enough to ask a question, and that single question would be enough to crack everything open. By evening, I still hadn't heard anything. I reminded myself to be patient. But patience is a luxury when your child might be lying on the edge. Exactly 24 hours after we left that house, my phone vibrated hard on the table, sliding a few inches. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. I stared at it, my heart stalling. Then I answered. Dad? The voice on the other end made me jump to my feet as if the chair beneath me had vanished. I'd heard Matthew's voice for months, always dull, breathless, like a radio full of static. But this voice was different, clear, steady, with a hint of the old irritation he used to have whenever I reminded him to drink water. "Matthew?" I had to say his name to be sure. "Yes, it's me." He took a deep breath and laughed softly, a sound that made my eyes burn. "Dad, I don't understand what's happening. This morning I sat up on my own. I walked a few steps. My head feels clearer. I squeezed the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I forced my voice to stay calm, like an old man simply hearing good news. "So, the medication is working," I said slowly, steadying myself. "No." Matthew replied immediately, his voice tightening. "Dad, it feels like someone changed what I was taking. I swear, the last few weeks, every time I took it, I felt worse. Yesterday, after I took it, I slept for a while, and when I woke up, it was like I'd been pulled out of fog." I closed my eyes. I pictured the pill organizer in the kitchen cabinet, the chalk-white pills. I swallowed hard. I couldn't tell the truth over the phone. If Elizabeth was nearby, everything would collapse. "Where are you right now?" I asked. "At home. Elizabeth told me to stay in bed." His voice dropped. She's pacing around the room like she lost something. "Dad, she's acting strange. I told her I wanted to go downstairs for water, and she rushed over like she was scared. She put her hand on my chest, said my heart was still weak, said I couldn't walk. But Dad..." Her eyes weren't worried. Her eyes were afraid. In that moment, I felt a cold, quiet satisfaction I didn't want to admit. I wasn't happy she was scared. I was relieved that Matthew was coming back to life, and her fear proved my suspicions were right. She was more afraid of him living than of him dying. "Listen to me," I said gently, like I was talking to a child. "Do what she says for now. Don't argue. Don't make her angry. Tell her you're tired and want to sleep more. Do you understand?" "You're talking like you're afraid of her," Matthew hesitated. "For now," I replied, keeping my breathing steady. "I'll come see you soon. But you need to stay safe." Matthew exhaled. "Dad, do you know what I heard her say on the phone the other day? I only caught part of it. She was in the kitchen, calling someone, saying, 'I did exactly what you told me, but he still hasn't.' Then she stopped when I walked in. I went still. Who was she calling? I don't know. She just called him him. At that moment, I heard a woman's voice through the phone, closer now, sharper. Elizabeth. "Matthew? Who are you talking to?" Matthew reacted instantly. "My dad. He was checking on me." I immediately changed my tone, slipping back into the voice of a trusting old man, slightly shaky in just the right way. "Hello, my daughter-in-law. I heard Matthew is doing better today. I guess the doctor's treatment is working." There was a very brief pause. Just a beat, but enough for me to feel her caution like a claw. "Yes, Dad," Elizabeth said, sweet to the point of being fake. "The treatment is working, but he needs absolute rest. The doctor said he can't be agitated. Please don't make him talk too much." Yes, I replied, as if afraid of doing something wrong. "I'm just relieved. I won't disturb him." "Thank you," she said, and I heard her take the phone from Matthew. "Matthew needs to sleep. Call back later." "All right," I said, keeping my voice soft. "Take care of him for me." The call ended. I stood in my small apartment, my hand still holding the phone in midair, like someone whose support had just been pulled away. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed again. A message from Matthew, just one line. "Dad, I'm scared." I sat down, my back feeling crushed, then stood up immediately. I didn't have the right to collapse. I'd stepped into this game, and I had to see it through. I called my old teammate. Matthew is awake. His voice is completely different. He was silent for a beat, then said firmly, "Good. Step 1 worked. Step 2 is keeping him alive long enough for the truth to surface. Elizabeth is suspicious, I said. I heard it on the phone. She's searching through things. Then you have to play your role even better, my friend replied. The more harmless you seem, the less likely she is to act recklessly. I hung up and looked around the empty room. I needed more than a hunch. I needed a thread leading to whoever was behind this. If Elizabeth was the hand, then who was the brain? I opened my old laptop, went through my contacts, and found a name I'd saved long ago. A private investigator in a neighboring district who had once helped a friend with a financial fraud case. I didn't like people who made a living off suspicion, but right now, that was exactly what I needed. The call was quick. I spoke briefly, avoiding sensitive words. I mentioned suspected insurance fraud and financial irregularities surrounding my son's illness. The investigator asked a few calm questions, not overly curious. Finally, he said, "What do you want me to dig into first?" "Everything," I replied. "Money, debt, beneficiaries, who gains if Matthew is gone?" That night, I texted Matthew again, simple as a prayer. Just pretend to sleep a lot. If she gives you the pills, take them on schedule like usual. Don't let her see you getting better too fast. Matthew replied, "I understand. I'll do as you say." The next 2 days felt like walking a tightrope. I visited Matthew once during the day, the proper kind of visit. Elizabeth opened the door with a perfect smile, but her eyes were red from lack of sleep. When I asked how things were, she kept glancing at my hands, at my coat pocket, as if afraid I was hiding something. Matthew was able to sit up. His face was less gray, his lips had some color again. When he saw me, his eyes flickered, like he wanted to say so much, but Elizabeth stood beside him like a shadow. I only held his hand and gave a light squeeze, signaling calm. Elizabeth poured me tea, her hand slightly shaking. She kept repeating the same line. "The doctor says he's improving, but it's still dangerous," as if she were trying to convince me, or herself. I nodded like a grateful old man. "That's wonderful. Thank you. You've been through a lot." She smiled, but the corner of her mouth twitched. I saw the exhaustion beneath the makeup, and I saw something else. Tightly contained frustration, like someone who had lost control but wasn't ready to explode. I left them in the house I had bought with my entire life. On the morning of the 3rd day, the investigator called back. His voice was still calm, but his first sentence sent a chill through me. "Mr. Jerome," he said, "Elizabeth has a large personal debt, but that's not the most notable thing. What stands out are the regular transfers into her account from a company I think you'll recognize." "From where?" I asked, my throat dry. "From a small investment firm," he replied. "The authorizing name is Caleb Hart, Matthew's older brother." It felt like something shattered inside my chest. Caleb, my firstborn, the one I trusted to protect his younger brother when I grew old. I stood there, staring out the window, the morning light pouring in without warmth. "The person who truly wants Matthew dead," the investigator continued, "is not just Elizabeth." I couldn't respond. My arm hung limp, the phone pressed to my ear like it weighed a ton. In my head, only one question remained, painful and suffocating. What had Caleb done to this family, and what signs had I ignored all these years? I stood in my apartment for a long time after that call, as if moving would make Caleb's name instantly become an unbearable truth. On the table lay the box of fake pills I'd kept in a plastic bag, pale white, a reminder that my family was being dragged into something darker than greed. I called the investigator back, my voice hoarse. "I need everything. Don't leave out a single detail." He didn't hesitate. I checked transactions, cross-referenced credit history, and some old civil court records. Matthew shows signs of gambling from a few years ago, but it escalated sharply in the last 8 months. Large cash withdrawals, multiple times a week, usually late at night, and his current debt is estimated at around $250,000. It felt like someone had opened a window in my head, icy air rushing in. My Matthew, who used to fear credit card debt more than thunderstorms, now carrying a number like that. I thought he was an engineer, living decently, I said, and even I heard the desperation. He may have started trying to win it back, the investigator replied, calm as a doctor reading test results. Lose, try to recover. Can't recover, borrow. Borrow, then try again. That cycle spares no one. I sat down, both hands on my knees, trying to keep them from shaking. And Caleb? Caleb has ties to a private lending group, not a bank, not legitimate. The investigator lowered his voice. And I have reason to believe Caleb is acting as both intermediary and beneficiary. The transfers into Elizabeth's account line up with when Matthew's condition worsened. It looks like someone was paying her to stay quiet and follow a script. I closed my eyes. The words I'd overheard in the kitchen came back. If he dies on schedule, I'd thought it was just Elizabeth's cruelty. Turns out, cruelty is sometimes just the outer layer of a much larger trap. I needed to hear it from Matthew himself, from his own mouth, not from documents. That evening, I drove to his house unannounced. It was cold, the porch light casting a thin yellow strip onto the road. I rang the bell once. No answer. I rang again, longer. Finally, Elizabeth opened the door, her smile fixed in place, but her eyes red and panicked. "Dad, why are you here so late?" She blocked the doorway, gripping the door like she was guarding a secret. "I want to see Matthew," I said plainly, not loud but no longer gentle. "He's sleeping. The doctor said—" "Elizabeth." I cut her off the first time I'd said her name without warmth. "I've waited long enough. I need 5 minutes." She looked at me, then toward the yard, as if afraid someone was watching from the dark. A second later, she stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Fine, 5 minutes." I went in. The house smelled of fabric softener and disinfectant, clean to the point of coldness. From upstairs, I heard a light cough. Matthew was awake. I went up. Matthew was propped against pillows, still thin, but with light in his eyes. When he saw me, his throat tightened as if he wanted to apologize before I even spoke. "Dad," he whispered. I pulled a chair close to the bed. I didn't take his hand like I usually did. I rested my hands on my knees, afraid that if I touched him, I'd lose the clarity I needed. "Matthew," I said slowly, "I want the truth. About everything. Caleb, the money, the pills." Matthew glanced quickly toward the door. Elizabeth stood in the hallway, pretending to busy herself with a cleaning cloth, but her ears were clearly tuned in. "I need to speak to my son alone," I said loudly enough for her to hear. "For 3 minutes." She froze. Her face went pale. Then she turned and walked downstairs, though I heard her stop halfway as if she couldn't bring herself to go far. Matthew took a breath, looking at me like a child caught doing something foolish. "Dad, I ruined everything." I clenched my jaw. "How much do you owe?" Tears welled up in his eyes. He didn't sob, just let them spill out like a crack giving way. $250,000. I thought I could win it back. I thought just one more time. But the more I tried, the deeper I sank. My heart pounded, not because of the money, but because I saw my son being pulled away piece by piece from who he used to be. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice rough like sandpaper. "Because I was ashamed," Matthew swallowed. "And because they didn't just threaten me, they mentioned Mia. Mia, Matthew's daughter, the little girl I used to carry around in star-print pajamas. Hearing her name made my stomach twist. Just one message. Matthew continued, voice shaking. A photo of her backpack at school. I understood immediately. They knew where she was. I held back my anger, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that turns cold. And Caleb? Matthew closed his eyes. Caleb said he could help. He said he had connections. He said if I did what they said, everything would be taken care of. He told me to think about Elizabeth and Mia. I looked at him. Do what, exactly? Matthew opened his eyes, his gaze broken. Dad, I thought about giving up. He said it like he was talking about missing a train, soft but desperate. I thought, if I disappeared naturally, Elizabeth and Mia would be safe. The insurance would pay. The debt would be cleared. They'd leave them alone. Hearing that felt like being slapped hard across the face, not because he was weak, but because he thought his death was a gift. You're out of your mind, I said, without contempt, only pain. Do you think I'd accept that gift? Matthew broke down, tears falling faster. I don't want to die, Dad. I couldn't see another way. I stood up and paced a few steps like a caged animal, then turned back to him. I lowered my voice, each word hammered into the floor. Listen to me. No debt is worth trading your life. No shame is worth leaving your daughter without a father. In the hallway there were light footsteps. Elizabeth entered the room, face drained of color, hands clutching her clothes. She looked at Matthew, then at me, lips trembling as if to argue. But finally she whispered, I had no choice. I turned to her. I didn't yell. I asked calmly, You believe locking Matthew in the house, giving him fake medication, and calling it detox means you had no choice? Elizabeth trembled. If I didn't, they would come for Mia. I looked straight into her eyes, and in that moment, everything flipped inside me. The woman I thought was holding the knife was also someone with a blade at her own throat. But that truth didn't ease anything. It only showed me the trap was bigger, filthier, and whoever stood behind it was far more monstrous. I said, each word hard as stone. So you chose the easiest path. You chose to let your husband die. Elizabeth collapsed into tears, covering her mouth. I didn't want to. I swear. I was just scared. I looked at Matthew, then at Elizabeth, and Caleb's face appeared in my mind, his confident smile whenever he said, I'll handle it. I understood why the insurance beneficiary had been changed. I understood why there was a death schedule. And I understood why Elizabeth was always watching the windows like someone might be standing outside. The investigator was right. The truth was crueler than a murder plot. This was a game of chess, where Matthew's death was a calculated move, and the one calculating it wanted more than money. He wanted control. I leaned close to Matthew and spoke softly so only he could hear. I'm getting you out of here. I'll protect Mia. But you have to listen to me. Don't act on your own. Matthew nodded, eyes red. Dad, how can you do this? They're not normal people. I straightened my back. I felt my age in my bones, but I also felt what I still had. The stubbornness of a father who'd spent his life on construction sites, enduring heat, cold, and humiliation so his children could be safe. If they wanted to trade my son's life for paperwork and money, they would have to go through me. I looked at Elizabeth. Tell me the truth. Who contacts you? Caleb or his people? Elizabeth shook her head, eyes wide. Not on the phone, they only text. And sometimes someone stands at the corner of the street. I only meet Caleb. Caleb said everything would be fine if Matthew did as told. I took a deep breath. The repayment deadline was closing in. If the die-on-schedule plan was disrupted, they would switch to something else. Not soup, not fake medication, something more direct, more forceful. I couldn't let things keep moving at their pace anymore. I stepped out of the room, pulled out my phone, and called my old teammate. When he picked up, I said only one sentence, my voice cold as steel. "We're out of time. I'll pay the price, with whatever I still have." And when I ended the call, a thought as clear as headlights appeared in my mind, terrifying and certain at the same time. If they wanted a life to close the books, I would make them look straight at me first. I didn't sleep that night. Back in my apartment, I sat by the window, staring at the empty parking lot, listening to the refrigerator hum like the breathing of a hospital room. There was only one sentence looping in my head. If I hesitated any longer, they wouldn't wait. I called Frank early in the morning. An old friend who used to work with me on construction sites later opened a home repair company, a dry man but loyal to the core. Frank answered with a groggy voice. "Jerome, what's going on?" "I need money," I said flatly. "A lot. A very large amount." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. "How much?" $250,000. Frank exhaled like someone had just shoved him into cold water. "You've lost your mind. What are you going to do with that kind of money?" "I'm saving my son," I said without elaborating. "In return, I'll work for you as long as it takes. For free. Consider it me selling the rest of my life." Frank swore under his breath, then lowered his voice. "Jerome, I'm not rich enough to throw money like that. But I have borrowing channels. Still, you'll sign papers. You'll pay it back with labor. Are you sure?" I looked at my calloused hands. "I'm sure." A long sigh. "All right, come to my shop at 9 a.m. Don't tell anyone." I got to Frank's shop while the sky was still dim. We signed the papers in a small office that smelled of machine oil. Frank didn't ask more questions. He just handed me a stack of documents and a newly opened bank card. "When you transfer the money, do it properly. And Jerome." Frank looked at me like he was watching someone step over a cliff. "You're really going to meet them?" "I have to," I replied. "I need them to back off." Frank didn't stop me. He only said one sentence that sounded like a prayer. "Then don't go alone." I called my old teammate, the one who had helped me break in to get the medication. He answered with just one line. "I'll be right behind you." That afternoon, I went back to Matthew's house. The house that had once been my pride now felt like a hastily built stage where everyone played their part just to survive. Matthew sat on the bed, his face exhausted, while Elizabeth stood by the door, her eyes swollen from crying. "What are you going to do, Dad?" Matthew asked, his voice hoarse. "I'm going to meet them," I said. "Pay the debt." Matthew half jumped up, then collapsed back down, like someone who'd just heard he was pardoned but still felt the noose around his neck. "No, you can't!" I cut him off. "Be quiet. You already tried handling this the worst possible way. Now it's my turn." Elizabeth trembled. "Caleb, he said if things don't go according to plan, they'll come back." "Then today I'll make sure they see me," I said, my eyes never leaving Matthew. "You stay in the room. Don't come down. No matter what you hear, don't come down." Matthew looked at me, eyes red, lips shaking. "Dad, if you meet them, you'll—" I stepped closer and put my hand on his shoulder, squeezing hard. "I've spent my whole life making sure you lived. This is no different." We set the meeting at a parking lot behind an old shopping center, where the neon lights flickered like they were about to die. I arrived on time, my old coat pulled tight around my neck, phone in hand, a thick envelope tucked under my arm. My old teammate stayed farther away in a car, out of sight. A black SUV rolled up and stopped a few steps from me. The window came down, revealing a large man with a cold face and a small scar on his chin. I didn't see Caleb, but I knew he was somewhere nearby, like a shadow giving orders. "Jerome Caldwell?" the man asked evenly. "Yes." "You here instead of Matthew today?" He smirked. An old man trying to play hero? I didn't argue. I just raised the envelope. 250,000, immediate transfer, and from now on, you stay away from my family. He tilted his head like he was enjoying a show. You think paying money is the end of it? You want money, I'm giving money, I said slowly, clearly. And if you want anything else, you picked the wrong house. He opened the door and stepped out, half a head taller than me. I didn't step back. I kept my old back straight, the way I used to on job sites, facing bad concrete pours that still had to be fixed. That was when Matthew appeared. I heard running footsteps and ragged breathing behind me, then saw my son rush into the parking lot like a man out of his mind. He hadn't listened. He came because he was afraid I was taking his place. "Dad!" Matthew shouted. "Don't—" I turned in an instant, stepped forward, and planted myself directly in front of him. My body was smaller than the other man's, but I stood like a door that would not open. I raised my hand, not to strike, but to block. "Step back," I said to Matthew, my voice low and firm. "Get in the car. Now." Matthew froze. Something shattered in his eyes, a mix of guilt and despair. The man laughed. Nice, very touching father-son moment. I turned back to him. "Transfer the money," I said, holding up my phone. "Now." He signaled to someone in the car. A few seconds later, my phone vibrated, the transaction notification appearing on the screen. I checked it again to be sure there was no trick. When the money left the account, it felt like a piece of flesh had been cut from me. A dull pain, but necessary. The man slipped the envelope into his jacket and leaned close to my face. "Just this once. But don't think you can control your son forever." I held his gaze. "I don't need control. I just need him alive." He shrugged and got back into the car. The SUV drove off, leaving the parking lot cold and eerily quiet. Matthew stood there, his shoulders shaking like a tree in a storm. He looked at me, then folded over, dry heaving, hands gripping his knees. I pulled him up and slapped him once, the only time in my life. Not hard, but hard enough to make him look up. Matthew stared at me, more shocked than hurt. I looked straight at him, my voice breaking after being held in for too long. "You are not allowed to die to pay off a debt," I said. "Do you hear me? Not allowed." Matthew broke down, no longer trying to hold it together. He clung to me like a child, his heavy shoulders pressing into my chest. I didn't say anything else. I just kept him standing. We went home in silence. Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped, like someone who'd just survived a storm but could still hear the thunder. Matthew went upstairs and closed his bedroom door. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring into the darkness above. No one spoke another word. In the large house, the ticking of the wall clock was so loud it was hard to breathe. And I understood that even though they had backed off, my family was still broken in a different way. But at least we were alive to pick up the pieces. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was completely still, the kind of silence where you can hear yourself swallow. I made coffee, watched the thin foam drift across the surface of the mug, then looked at the empty chair where my wife used to sit. If she were still alive, she would have said one thing straight out. Don't save him just to send him back into the same trap. Matthew came down to the kitchen later, dark circles under his eyes, pajamas rumpled. He didn't look at me right away. He stared at his hands like he was checking whether he was still a person or just a pile of breathing mistakes. "Dad?" "I'm sorry," he said, so softly it almost dissolved into the hum of the air conditioner. I didn't hug him. I didn't scold him. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Sorry doesn't pay debts. Sorry doesn't cure habits. If you want to live, you have to change." Elizabeth appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair messy, eyes swollen. She stood there for a moment like someone unsure if she still had the right to enter the conversation. I looked at her and no longer saw the smoothness of a skilled performer. I saw a woman who had lived in fear for so long that even her face looked tired. "We're selling the house," I said firmly. Matthew jerked his head up. "We can't. This house is a golden cage," I cut in. "I helped put it within your reach with the money I sacrificed, and you turned it into a stage for self-destruction. We're not keeping the cage." Matthew tried to argue, but his lips trembled and then pressed shut. He understood. He just wasn't used to being responsible for the things he'd broken. I took out a sheet of paper I'd prepared and slid it across the table. A short, clear list: sell the house, pay off most of the debt, cut all luxury, therapy, support groups, change phone numbers, shut down every path back to gambling. No negotiation. "I'm not forcing you to live rich," I said. "I'm forcing you to live." 2 days later, I took Matthew to a support group for gambling addiction. The room at the community center was bare to the point of discomfort. Folding chairs, plastic water jugs, weak coffee. Matthew walked in like someone entering a courtroom. He sat down, hands clenched, listening as others talked about losing houses, marriages, even their self-respect. When it was Matthew's turn to stand, his voice caught. I sat in the back, not intervening. I just watched his back, remembering how straight and confident it used to be when he was a boy running around the yard. "Hi, my name is Matthew," he said, his voice breaking. I'm addicted to gambling." The words dropped like a stone. Painful, but a beginning. I saw his shoulders shake, but he stayed standing. At the same time, I called a realtor. Showings happened one after another, people walking through the spacious living room, praising the high ceilings, the beautiful kitchen, the safe neighborhood. I stood in a corner, feeling like I was watching a person being sold, and not a house. Every compliment was a reminder of how much effort we'd put into building the shell. Elizabeth tried to stay composed in front of buyers, but when the door closed, she leaned against the wall and sighed like she'd just run a long distance. "I'll get a job," she told me one afternoon, right there in the kitchen. No sweet tone, no acting. "I'll take care of my part." I nodded. "Good." She looked at Matthew, then at me. "And I'll give back what I benefited from. I don't want to live off the idea of his death." I didn't offer praise or forgiveness. I just told the truth. "If you stay, live properly. No one has the energy to perform anymore." A few days later, I saw something I never would have imagined before. Elizabeth laid several designer handbags on the table, one by one. Shiny leather, bright zippers, the things she used to cling to as proof of a successful life. Now she opened her phone, took photos, and listed them for sale. No makeup, no glamorous clothes, just a woman sitting under the kitchen light, selling the shine that had once hidden her face. Matthew stood on the stairs, watching, silent. He didn't say anything, but I saw something soften in his eyes, like the noose around his neck had loosened just a bit. The house sold faster than I expected. The price wasn't what it had been when the market was hot, but it was enough to pay off most of the debt and cut off the danger of being dragged back in. On the day we signed the papers, Matthew's hand shook as he held the pen. I stood beside him and placed my hand over his wrist. "You're signing to live," I reminded him. We moved into a much smaller rental apartment, 2 bedrooms, narrow hallways, an old elevator that creaked. No yard, no garage, no marble countertops, just empty walls that would need time to become a home. Matthew carried a cardboard box upstairs. Elizabeth carried one into the kitchen. No one complained. There was a strange relief in not having to look rich anymore. I went back to the construction site, but not the way I used to. Frank kept his word. He put me on safety supervision and training new workers. I no longer carried heavy loads all day, but I still worked, still traded hours for dollars to repay the debt. Every afternoon, I wrote the amount paid in a small notebook. Not because I was obsessed, but because I wanted to see the path I was walking. step by step. Matthew started over with the smallest things. He handed me his phone for a while, voluntarily cut off addictive apps, attended meetings regularly. Some days he came home drenched in sweat, eyes red, but he looked at me and said, "Today I wanted to run." But I stayed. I just nodded. Good. Elizabeth started working at a nearby dental clinic. She came home tired, smelling not of makeup anymore but of hand sanitizer and scrubs. She cooked simple dinners, sometimes just pasta and salad. No more posts showing off the house or the cars. No more sweet words to people's faces and coldness behind their backs. She spoke less, but she was more real. We weren't rich. No one in the house felt like they were winning anymore. But every morning I woke up, I heard Matthew moving around in his room, heard him cough once and then take his medication on time, heard Elizabeth open the door and leave for work, and I saw one thing clearly. We still had a chance. Still, one late evening while I was washing dishes, Matthew's phone lying on the table vibrated softly. The screen lit up with a short notification, just long enough to appear before going dark again. An unknown number. Not saved. I didn't pick it up. I just looked at it, my heart sinking as if someone had pulled it downward. Peace sometimes looks like a calm lake, smooth on the surface. But I had learned that all it takes is one stone dropped in, and the ripples can travel far. After that message from the unknown number, Matthew went quiet as stone. He flipped the phone face down on the table, trying to act normal, but his shoulders tensed like someone standing in a hailstorm while pretending the sun was out. I didn't ask right away. I finished washing the last plate, dried my hands slowly, then pulled out a chair and sat across from him. In the cramped kitchen, even the soft hum of the refrigerator sounded loud. Elizabeth was in the bathroom, the steady sound of running water behind the half-closed door. "Who was it?" I asked. Matthew shook his head. "I don't know." I looked straight at him. "Don't lie in this house." His lips twitched, then he let out a breath. "Maybe someone from before." "From before who?" He swallowed. "The lenders." I nodded once, not surprised at all. This kind of peace had never been free. I leaned toward him and spoke slowly, carefully. "You've paid the money. You're doing the right things. But you are not allowed to go back into that hole because of a single message." Matthew pressed his fingers to his forehead, his voice rough. "You don't understand. I thought I was stronger, but every night I dream about dragging the whole family down with me. I see my daughter crying. I see Elizabeth shaking. I see you standing in front of me. I wake up and I can't breathe." I kept my voice calm, though my chest burned. Guilt doesn't disappear quickly. It's not a button you push, but running away won't make it lighter either. Matthew looked at me, eyes red. "I'm so tired." At that moment, Elizabeth came out, her hair still wet, catching the last sentence. She stopped, didn't interrupt, just looked at Matthew the way one looks at a crack they helped create. I tapped my finger lightly on the table. "Listen." I lowered my voice, but the words were sharp as a blade. "You live to fix your mistakes, not to run from them." Matthew froze. I hadn't called him that way since he was a kid, but sometimes gentleness is just a shortcut back to relapse. He lowered his head. "What do I have to do?" "Face it," I said. "Tomorrow you call someone from the group. You tell them everything. You give me your phone for a while longer, and if that number calls again, I'll answer." Elizabeth took a breath. "I'll be honest too," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "No more hiding. If anything connected to the past comes up, I'll say it right away. I don't want to live half-truths anymore." Matthew looked at her, his eyes unsteady. No apology could be enough, but at least there was a truthful sentence. In the other room, the little girl slept peacefully. I walked past and saw the small blanket rise and fall with her steady breathing. That child didn't need a big house. She needed adults who took responsibility. That night, Matthew sat at the kitchen table writing down the things he had done, the people he had hurt, and what he had to make right. I didn't read it. I just sat nearby, so he wouldn't be alone while looking at himself. I felt my hair grow grayer, my back ache more, but my heart felt a little lighter because this time he didn't run. He stayed. I am 71 years old. My back still hurts whenever the weather changes. In my notebook, the numbers I still owe haven't disappeared. I still wake up early to go to work, still count every dollar I pay back, still live slower than the age people usually call retirement. But my son is alive. Every morning I hear Matthew walking around the small apartment, hear him make coffee, hear him talk to his daughter in the normal voice of a father who is still here. Those sounds are worth more to me than any house or account I ever had. I thought for a long time about what it means to be a father. For many years, I believed being a father meant giving money, providing everything, building a life where my child never lacked anything. I sold my house, my strength, almost all the healthiest years of my life to buy that false sense of security, and it nearly killed my son. Now I understand that being a father is not about giving money. It's about standing between your child and the storm, even if it means using your own body to take the wind. It's about being calm enough not to make noise before the right moment, strong enough to say no, steady enough to observe, and humble enough to seek the right help at the right time. My family is not perfect. Matthew still has to face the mental consequences every day. Elizabeth is still learning how to live honestly without hiding behind a role. I am aging faster, but my heart is lighter because this time we are not running anymore. The story you just heard is a fictional story inspired by real-life situations and human experiences. It does not encourage any extreme actions or violations of the law. What I believe is that when a family falls into crisis, quiet observation, clear-headed analysis, and seeking the right support from professionals, the law or trusted people are always more important than impulsive emotional reactions. If you or someone you love is in a similar situation, please don't carry it alone. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Thank you for listening until the very end. Your presence is the reason stories like this are told. And if you think this video could help someone out there who hasn't found their voice yet, please share it.